further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Ellen Davis, an expert on ketogenic nutrition. She has her master's degree in applied clinical nutrition. She is an incredible author. You should read some of her books. We'll have a list close to the end. She's an advocate for all kinds of integrative health care, and her website, Ketogenic Diet Resource with the dashes.com, has helped many, many people achieve optimal health and wellness. And I think that this is a very timely presentation as we learn more and more about how diet can impact cancer risk, cancer prevention, and cancer recovery. So welcome, Dr. Ellen Davis. It's so nice to have you with us today.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's great to be here. I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for this discussion. Today we're going to talk about the ketogenic diet for cancer. I'll explain more about that as we go along. But the first thing I wanted to say is that for the last 40 years or so, the cancer research world has been focused on finding a genetic cause for cancer. And in 2006, the National Cancer Institute launched a project called the Cancer Genome Atlas, and they were supposed to find the genetic causes of cancer so that they could be targeted by specific drugs to either cure cancer or reverse it or put it into remission. That was been going on since then, and by 2012, the researchers found nothing. What they actually found was chaos, that there was a genetic trigger for just about every specific type of cancer, and not only that, that they were different among individual people with cancer. So they just basically found chaos. So they didn't find what they were looking for, and although 700 drugs or so have been developed for cancer, none of them really have an impact on patient life extension or remission. You don't see any of that. It's basically been a failure, that particular project. So today what we're going to talk about is a different idea, that cancer is not a genetically caused disease, that it's looking more and more like it might be a metabolic disease, and there's a lot of research going on about that now. And some of the researchers, Dr. Thomas Seyfried and Dr. Dominic D'Agostino, are making pretty good strides in showing some pretty definitive outcomes by using metabolic therapies. So the ketogenic diet is one such therapy, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So first thing I want to talk about is what is a ketogenic diet, and it is a diet which emphasizes fats and proteins but restricts carbohydrates. So there are three types of food that you can eat to provide fuel for your body. The first one is carbohydrate, and that is your breads, pastas, cakes, anything with starch and sugar. And then there's fat, which is butter, oil, avocado, coconut, and nuts. And then we have protein, which will be your meat, fish, fowl, and eggs. Those particular they're called macronutrients, the larger scientific term, if you want to say, are what fuel us. So a ketogenic diet basically restricts carbohydrates and emphasizes fats and enough protein to support body functions. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so slide 7. Food. So the food that we talked about, those three macronutrients, provide two types of energy. You can either use sugar to burn for fuel in the body, or you can use fats and fat products called ketones. And those come from the breakdown of fats in the body. Protein can be used to make glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, but mostly protein is used as a way to support body tissues, to build new tissues, build new cells, and things like that. So protein is mostly a building block. It's not really a fuel source. But glucose and ketones are our main fuel sources. We will also want to talk about insulin during this discussion because it's a prime driver of cancer growth at high insulin levels, and insulin is driven by the amount of carbohydrate that you take in. So the more carbohydrate that you take in through your diet, the higher your blood sugars are going to be, and then once blood sugar is high, the body will release insulin from the pancreas to take care of that blood sugar and put it into your cells so it can be burned for energy. If you eat a high carbohydrate diet over time, then the chronic elevation of blood sugar and causes a chronic elevation of insulin, and that develops into a process called insulin resistance over time. So for most people who are what I call carbohydrate intolerant, eating a very high carb diet you will end up with insulin resistance over time, because it's basically like having a rock band playing at a really loud level around your cells. Eventually they're going to kind of like close up shop and not listen anymore because it's damaging their body. It's the same thing with high blood sugar. If your blood sugar is high all the time and insulin's high all the time, then the cells eventually stop talking or stop listening to insulin because they can't take in any more sugar. That particular problem is what leads to metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, which is really strongly associated with cancer. So there's definitely some scientific evidence behind that link. So when we talk about your food, your body breaking down food for energy, that's called your metabolism, and it's the purpose of your metabolism is to make ATP, which is an energy source that basically runs our bodies. Without it, we can't live. And in normal cells, ATP is made through the mitochondria, which take the oxygen that you breathe in and the energy from your food that gets broken down in your gut, and to make this energy source of ATP. And a metabolic disease, which is what we're saying that cancer might be, is one in which those processes are broken, that the cell mitochondria are unable to make energy normally. So cancer cells are basically sugar addicts, meaning that they prefer to burn sugar over the normal mitochondrial respiration, which uses oxygen and the products from burning sugar. So it's this kind of technical, but it basically means that cancer cells don't have working mitochondria, or they don't work. They may work slightly, but they don't work like normal cells do, and so they are dependent upon a great deal of sugar in the bloodstream to keep going. So, and it's called the Warburg effect. Cancer cells use great amounts of glucose or blood sugar and rely on insulin to get that sugar. So the insulin takes the blood sugar and pushes it into the cell, and the cancer cell takes advantage of any high levels of blood sugar to fuel themselves and to grow and to stay viable when they really should be dying, since they're damaged cells. They should be committing what's called apoptosis, to kill themselves. That's what normal cells do when they're damaged, but cancer cells are damaged. They're almost like little zombies. They use this sugar to stay alive when they should be dying. So studies have shown that cancer patients with higher blood sugars and insulin have worse outcomes, and that makes sense to me, because the higher your blood sugar and insulin are, the more likely a cancer is going to grow. So there's a relationship, as I was talking about before, between food, insulin, and blood sugar. Fats and oils, when you eat them, have little effect on blood sugar and insulin. You can see it in this graph here. The green line is after a meal of a high-fat, moderate-protein meal with very low carbohydrate. And the red line is one in which someone ate a very high-carbohydrate, low-fat meal. You can see how blood sugar spikes and then comes down and crashes below the baseline, which is something called reactive hypoglycemia, reactive low blood sugar. And those spikes and dips are drivers for the body to dump a bunch of insulin into your bloodstream. So over time, as I said, that will end up in insulin resistance. Protein in moderate amounts raises insulin a little bit and blood sugar moderately, but you can see carbohydrate raises blood sugar and insulin very high, no matter what form it is. You know, a lot of people like to talk about complex carbohydrates and being better than refined carbohydrates, but for a person who's carbohydrate intolerant or sensitive to carbohydrates, any carbohydrate will drive up blood sugar. So, you know, a piece of whole wheat bread is going to drive up blood sugar as much as a candy bar. So that's one thing to remember about carbohydrates. They all pretty much trigger high blood sugar. So the reason that a ketogenic diet works is that it reduces that blood sugar and insulin levels because it you stop taking in the foods, the carbohydrate foods that trigger high blood sugar. When you do that, the cancer cells, because they have that broken mitochondria, they can only use sugar. They can't use ketones. So what happens on the ketogenic diet, you stop taking in carbohydrates, your body gets used to that, and it starts using fat for fuel. It releases fat from your stored fat that's stored in your cells, or it will take the fat from your diet and burn it. It breaks it down. Some of it goes to supplying your muscles with fatty acids, and then as the levels of fatty acids in the blood rise, the liver starts making them into ketones, and those ketones can be used by your brain and other cells that normally wouldn't be able to use fatty acids. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch. You get fat for your fatty acids for your muscles, and then you get ketones for your brain function. And as those ketones build up in the bloodstream and blood sugar drops, then cancer cells get low on fuel supplies because they're looking for sugar. And as ketones rise and blood sugar drops, they don't have much fuel because their mitochondria are broken. They can't use ketones as a fuel source because ketones have to be broken down in the mitochondria. That's normally where they're broken down in normal cells. So that's how you kind of like put a kibosh on a fuel supply for a cancer cell is run your body on ketones instead of sugar. So the other benefit of that is that as insulin is lowered, it also lowers some downstream hormones like insulin growth factor and tumor factor, which causes, which allows tumors to build more blood vessels to supply its cells. So not only lowering blood sugar is great, but lowering insulin is great because that lowers these downstream factors that drive cancer growth. Ketones have also been found just recently. This is a new thing that's come out in the last couple of years. Ketones also suppress genetic factors which upregulate cancer proliferation. So these are called, it's a funny name, it's a long name, histone deacetylase inhibitors. And basically what that means is that in your DNA of your cells, there are proteins called histones that control whether your cell expresses a certain gene. And ketones have been found to express the gene that suppresses cancer growth. That's the short, very simple explanation, but basically they work to fix broken genetics within the cell to stop cancers from starting. The evidence for all of this is clear. It's in PubMed.gov. If you can go to PubMed.gov and do plenty of searching. If you search on ketogenic diets and cancer, you'll find a ton of papers out there, starting from way back. Linda Nebling in, I believe it was in the 80s, she came up with the idea that if cancers use sugar for growth, maybe we should stop giving patients sugar. So she put 2 young girls with brain cancer on a ketogenic diet, and in 8 weeks, both girls showed slowing of cancer progression, and I believe they both lived much longer than they would have, because a person with brain cancer gets about an 18-month life extension. It's about 18 months they give them. So these 2 girls lived way beyond that. So that was the first kind of inkling that this metabolic theory might have something to it. Dr. Eugene Fine in 2012 did a pilot study of 10 patients with advanced cancers. These were patients that were basically very close to passing within, a couple of months, very, very sick. But 5 of them, with the patients with the highest ketone levels from the baseline when they started, showed tumor regression. So it definitely had an impact. Dr. D'Agostino and Dr. Thomas Seyfried at Boston College. Dr. D'Agostino is at the University of South Florida, and Dr. Seyfried is at Boston College. They've done many, many mouse studies showing that the combination of a ketogenic diet, hyperbaric oxygen, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, and ketone supplementation, another alternative therapy, improves survival rates by 100% or more in those mice. So you infect a mouse with a tumor, you give it these treatments, and it basically reverses the cancer in the mouse. Dr. Rainier Clement in Germany, he just recently put 6 patients on a ketogenic diet. who were getting radiation. 5 showed tumor regression. A 6th patient showed only slight progression until ending the diet. And then basically progression happened very quickly after ending the diet. So that patient didn't do very well. But there are other research doing work in this area. Adrian Scheck at the Barrow Neurological Institute, Zhang Ro in Canada, and Natalie Jansen, another German researcher. So those are some names to look up on pubmed.gov if you want to see more of the studies. The compatible therapies that I've mentioned, ketone supplementation, there's quite a bit of interest in this area. Dr. Richard Veach came out with this, with the idea about this in the 90s. Basically, companies have designed salts that carry the ketones. They're called one of the main ketones that helps with that helps the body make some of these effects on cancer is called beta hydroxybutyrate. So it's a long scientific name, but it allows the body to fix cellular dysfunction around cancer and protects normal cells. But ketone supplementation is basically taking beta hydroxybutyrate in a salt form, and so that you can take it with a glass of water, or you can put it in a shake or whatever. But it raises, when you take a bolus of these ketones, you can raise your ketone levels temporarily for a couple of hours. Dr. D'Agostino contends that even doing that is helpful for fighting cancer, even if you're not in ketosis. I would say that being in natural ketosis and then adding the ketones on top of it is probably going to give you the best bang for your buck, because they are expensive. Another complementary theory, which I mentioned before, is hyperbaric oxygen. Basically, the patient goes and sits in an oxygen chamber and gets saturated with oxygen, which saturates the body and the tumors. Well, cancer doesn't like oxygen. It would prefer that it not. It prefers low oxygen environments, and that's because of something called free radicals. You may have heard this when people talk about it in terms of aging, that free radicals, damage the body. And basically what that is that oxygen is a very volatile molecule, and when it comes into your cells to be burned in the mitochondria, it releases what are called reactive oxygen species, which are little molecules that like to connect to other molecules when they're not supposed to and cause damage. And normal cells have a defense against those, and cancer cells use tons of sugar to defend themselves against reactive oxygen species. So when you flood a tumor with oxygen, the amount of reactive oxygen species that are created, the cancer cell can't fight that, and basically does some damage to the cancer cell on top of the ketone. So it's a great therapy to add to cancer treatments in terms of a ketogenic diet or ketone supplementation. Those 3 things are really where you can see some serious differences in stopping a tumor growth. Dr. Seyfried really believes in calorie restriction. So if you're going to do a ketogenic diet, he thinks it should be lower calorie. I'm not sure that that's been shown in the studies, although I think he's got a valid point. But Eugene Fine found in his study that it wasn't so much the calories, it was the level of ketosis reached, how high the ketones were in the bloodstream that made the difference. And now calorie restriction can definitely raise ketones even further. So it does have, Dr. Seyfried does have a point there. Metformin is being used. It's a diabetes drug for type 2 diabetes. It basically helps the body reverse insulin resistance. It helps the body become more insulin sensitive, and that always helps because then your insulin levels are going to drop. The amounts that are being given to type 2 diabetics have not been tested for cancer. I think they use much higher amounts for cancer studies, but it has been shown that people who take metformin have lower rates of cancer. And there's another substance called modified citrus pectin that has some research behind it that can kill cancer cells. It's pretty cheap stuff. It's basically just made from oranges, heated pectin. That's also on PubMed if you want to take a look. And then reishi mushroom extracts. have been shown to help the immune system fight off cancer cells. So those are some more things that you can do some research on. So if you're going to start a ketogenic diet, there are some goals that you want to reach. The goals include, as I said before, lowering blood sugar and insulin while raising ketones. And minimizing and treating side effects of the dietary change. So when you start a ketogenic diet is pretty powerful, metabolically speaking. So once you start this diet, there are some side effects to work through, and just knowing about them will help you get through them without much trouble. Mostly what you want to do is make sure that your mineral balances are taken care of, because the diet has a very diuretic effect on the body. In other words, when your insulin is high, you retain water. When glycogen, which is the storage form of glucose, when glucose is high, your body retains water. This is why you see high blood pressure is a major problem for people with metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance. It's because their body's retaining a ton of water. So when you go on a ketogenic diet, the first thing your body does, it brings down your insulin levels, it brings down your glycogen, your stored glycogen levels in your liver, and your body starts dumping water. And you'll find that first week that you're on the diet, you will be in the bathroom quite a bit, releasing that water. And what happens when you release that kind of water from the body, it also takes minerals with it. That would be sodium, magnesium, potassium. So you have to make sure that those are replenished as you go along. And the way that you replenish those is you salt your food. Don't be afraid to salt your food. You want to make sure that you eat a lot of avocado and green vegetables for potassium. And I advise people to take magnesium citrate supplements, 400 milligrams at night, but that's individual. You want to make sure that you don't take too much. If you take too much magnesium, you'll know immediately, because you'll have very loose bowels. So you can back that off to 200 milligrams or whatever works for you. But those three things are, I think, critical for feeling pretty good the first 2 weeks on the diet, and drinking lots of water. My book has details on that. But the other thing that you want to do is monitor your progress when you start the diet. So you want to get blood tests done at baseline. You want to get a cholesterol. People worry about the cholesterol thing from eating more fat in their diet. So go and get a complete blood panel done, a complete blood chemistry panel done. That'll get your cholesterol levels, your blood sugar levels, and things like that. And that way, after a month on the diet, you're going to have blood tests done again, and you can see how you're heading in that direction. Most likely, your cholesterol will drop, and most likely, your blood sugar will drop. So the other way to monitor progress is to keep a blood sugar log. And this is something I think is really important for the individual, because everybody's different, and different foods affect different people. So you should keep a blood sugar log and check your blood sugar before and an hour and 2 hours after meals to track, keep a log of what you're eating, so that this particular food drives up my blood sugar or doesn't drive up my blood sugar. Some people are affected by artificial sweeteners, for example, and some people aren't. So it's just a good way to find out how your body reacts to the foods that you're choosing. You can check blood ketone levels. There are urine strips that you can use at first, just to make sure that you're moving in the right direction and you're going into ketosis. And then later on, once your body adapts to being in ketosis, then you can check your blood levels. Now, I would say there that blood tests for ketones, you can do it with a device called the Precision Extra by Abbott Laboratories. It does blood sugar and ketones, but the ketone strips are expensive. They're going to cost you between $1 and $2 every time you check. So it's a good way to just, I would say probably check maybe every couple of days once you're keto adapted, and that usually takes 2 to 4 weeks for someone. So once you start the diet, it'll take about 2 to 4 weeks for your body to get into ketosis and stay there, as long as you don't cheat or have any kind of carbohydrate. If you have any kind of carbohydrate during that time, you're going to put yourself back at square one. So you want to make sure that you don't slip up during those 2 to 4 weeks, or even after, once you're in ketosis. But once you're there, you can check for, accurately check for ketones in your blood by using this Precision Extra device. So my book talks about how to customize the diet for your particular needs, and it shows you how to determine your protein needs. That's going to be about 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram of lean body mass or ideal body weight. So what that means is that per pound, you just want to take whatever your weight is in pounds or your ideal weight is in pounds and divide it by 2.2. That will give you your kilograms. So let's say you weigh 150 pounds, you can divide that by 2.2. That's going to give you about 60 kilograms, which means about, then you take 60 kilograms and multiply it by 0.8 to 1. So that's going to give you about 55 to 62 grams of protein per day for a person who weighs 150 pounds. And then you want to limit your carbohydrates to about 12 grams a day to start on the diet. And that'll help you quickly get into ketosis. And then you want to eat fat to satiety, meaning until you're hungry. So this is, people think that you have to eat sticks of butter, or, that's not true. On a ketogenic diet, there's fat in the protein that you choose, so meat's going to have fat in it. So you only probably need maybe another tablespoon or 2 of fat at each meal. So if you have 2 eggs in the morning and 3 slices of bacon, maybe add, a half a tablespoon in the frying pan for the eggs and a half a tablespoon at the table over your eggs, and that's about all you would need in terms of fat. Same thing with the salad, at lunch, meat and salad greens and maybe 2 tablespoons of dressing. It's not a lot of fat. People think they need to have bulletproof coffee and those kinds of things, and those are helpful for hunger. Bulletproof coffee being coffee that's blended with coconut oil or butter. Those are helpful to stave off hunger, those kinds of treats, but I personally don't think you need that much fat, especially if you're a smaller person. If you're a big person, if you're 6'4" and you weigh 240 pounds of solid muscle, then you can probably have several bulletproof coffees during the day and add more fat to your meals, and you'll be fine. But if you're a small woman, then you probably don't need that much fat. And that speaks to Dr. Seyfried's, keeping your calories somewhat, maybe 10% below what would be recommended. And all of this can be done with the fasting. Dr. Seyfried would like to see that you fast the first 2 days of the diet. If you're strong, if you're in good health, if you're not losing weight too quickly or anything like that, you can fast to raise your ketones quickly. Intermittent fasting might be a better idea, where maybe you skip one meal during the day. You eat breakfast and lunch and then don't eat again until breakfast the next day, or you eat lunch and dinner and don't eat again until lunch the next day. That's called intermittent fasting, and that also can raise ketones quickly. So the allowed foods on the diet, the fats, I always tell people look for natural fats. You don't want to go to vegetable oils like canola oil or soybean oil or things like that, because those particular fats are somewhat inflammatory to the body, and we're trying to bring down inflammation. Cancer is an inflammatory condition, so you want to bring down inflammation. So you want to stick with natural fats like butter, olive oil, macadamia nuts, coconut oil. The great thing about coconut oil and what's called an MCT oil, a medium chain triglyceride oil, is that those oils will raise ketones. And they do that because they can't be stored like long chain fatty acids such as butter. So the body has to burn medium chain triglycerides immediately, and those immediately get dumped into the ketone arena. So those are great for also helping to raise ketones. The only caution I would have about coconut oil and MCT oil, because of that medium chain triglyceride content, if you eat a whole bunch of them, you're going to get sick to your stomach. So you want to be very careful about adding those particular oils to your diet slowly and over time. Protein, any meat, fish, fowl, shellfish, whole eggs, bacon even. I know people, think bacon's horrible stuff, but it's very tasty, and it has a lot of fat in it. So in your protein choices, I would recommend that you choose higher fat meat. So, pork shoulder over pork loin, chicken thighs over chicken breasts. And the reason for that is if you choose a higher fat meat, you can have a bigger portion at your meal. Because part of it will be fat and part of it will be protein, because you don't want to go over on your protein. If you're eating shrimp and chicken breasts who are very lean in protein, you're going to quickly add up your, whatever 10 or 15 grams of protein that you need at each meal, depending on your particular customization, macronutrient customization. So I always tell people choose the higher fat meat so you can have a bigger portion. And then carbohydrates are going to be leafy green vegetables, cabbage, spinach, kale, mustard greens, lettuce. All vegetables have carbohydrates in them, but the leafy green ones have the least amount. And you can also have nuts, which are high in fat and have a little bit of carbohydrate in them, but not much. And depending on the nut, you want to stay away from cashews. But almonds are good, pecans are good. So those are kind of some of the foods that you can have. And then these are the foods to limit, to avoid a limit. Any sugars or starches, sweetened foods, you can see the picture there. Pineapple is like pure sugar. Bagels, as I said, even vegetables have carbohydrates, but those leafy green vegetables are allowed. Tomatoes are pretty high in sugar, so you want to limit those. So tomato sauce and things like that, probably too high in carbohydrate for this diet. And then the obvious ones, cereals, cakes, cookies, anything with sugar in it. Fruit and fruit juice are pretty much limited. As the diet goes on, you get keto adapted and you're checking your logs, you might be able to add some berries, which are pretty low in carbohydrate, but I wouldn't recommend having those at first while you're trying to get into ketosis. Your dairy proteins are limited on this diet because one of the other things that cancer uses to grow is an amino acid, which is a protein, a building block of protein called glutamine. It's an amino acid called glutamine, and cancer can take glutamine and turn that into sugar. So dairy proteins are really high in protein, and they also can be high in hormones which drive insulin. So you want to limit dairy proteins, milk, yogurt, those kinds of things. Now, dairy fats are okay. Dairy fats like pure sour cream, which doesn't have any whey added to it, which is a dairy protein. So pure sour cream, cream cheese, butter, dairy fats are okay, but dairy protein we ask you to restrict because they're very insulinogenic. In other words, they ramp up insulin very quickly, and that glutamine can be used by cancer cells. So that's the reason on the dairy protein, and the book talks about that in more detail. Sweetened drinks, yeah, you don't want to ever drink your calories, so watch out for fruit juice, for sodas, things like that all have to be avoided. And then whey protein, you'll see people use whey protein powders for shakes. Whey protein is extremely insulinogenic. It really drives up insulin over the short term, so we ask you to avoid that as well. Pea protein, if you can find a good pea protein, that might be better if you're having trouble getting food down and keeping food down and you're using shakes for that matter. Use a pea protein instead. And then there are sugary vegetables out there, the starchy vegetables like tomatoes, carrots, winter squash, those all have to be avoided. So I just talked about glutamine. It's an amino acid that cancer cells can use to make energy, and that's why we limit dairy proteins. And we limit total protein intake, is to keep that glutamine source of energy down. Dairy fats, as I said, are okay. Sour cream, butter, cream cheese. You want to make sure that sour cream doesn't have added whey, so look at the labels on that. And then other things to talk about, exercise. Hard exercise and lifting heavy weights or running or, aerobics can raise blood sugar temporarily, but it also improves insulin resistance. So again, this is a great thing for logging. If you find that your blood sugar stays high after lifting heavy weights or running, and it stays high over a long period of time, like until your next meal, you may want to reduce the intensity. Again, this is individual, so keep a log on that. Alcohol can be allowed. I know one patient that I've talked to, she calls it her vino therapy, and it's very important to her to have a glass of dry wine in the evening. So it is okay in moderation, but alcohol does interfere with the liver's ability to make ketones. So again, log and see what's going on with your particular ketone production after you have a drink. Beer is made from grain. I would avoid it. That's a high carbohydrate. You've seen beer bellies on people, and that's from that grain-based carbohydrate intake. Stress, if you have cancer, I know how stressful that can be, so it's kind of a funny thing to say, avoid stress, or because it raises blood sugar, but do strive to relax and have fun and try not to worry. I know it's a crazy thing to ask people who are sick, but it's going to help in the long run. So I get a lot of questions about the acidity and alkalinity of cancer, because the Gerson therapies and some other therapies that are out there, which have helped people, talk about, the acid and alkaline content of the blood. And what I would say about that is that cancer cells create a lot of acid because they release, in burning all of that sugar, they release a product called lactic acid. It's the same thing that happens in your muscles when you work out really hard and they burn. That's lactic acid being formed in the muscles. So cancer cells create a lot of acid around the tumor area. And that particular reason is why the body seems acidic when you have cancer. The cancer cells are making the acid. As Dr. D'Agostino, I asked Dr. D'Agostino about this, and he said an alkaline diet, which is one that's higher in vegetables, low in sugar, low in grains, an alkaline diet can't hurt, but it won't do much to restore defective cancer cell metabolism or even change the tumor microenvironment. In other words, the tumor is going to keep making acid, and we're not going to fix the root problem. The metabolic theory says the root problem of cancer is that it's unable to break down oxygen in the mitochondria, and changing your diet to an alkaline diet is not going to fix that. What you want to do to fix that is stop the fuel source that cancer cells use to support that broken metabolism. Another question I get is about antioxidants, whether those are good or bad, and the jury is still out as to whether they help. There are papers on both sides of the equation. What I would say about that is radiation uses free, I talked about free radicals before to kill cancer cells. That's what radiation does. It upregulates those reactive oxygen species around the cancer around the tumor, and that kills the tumor cells. So if you give somebody antioxidants, those cancer cells are going to make use of those. So an antioxidant is something that kills free radicals. It goes in and stops the domino effect, like a free radical steals electrons from the next molecule, and then that steals something from the next molecule, and it causes like a chain reaction that damages a bunch of molecules in the tissue and ends up damaging the cell itself. So antioxidants are given to kill free radicals. If you give somebody free radicals who has cancer and is getting radiation, and you give them an antioxidant, sorry, not a free radical, an antioxidant, then the cancer cells can use those antioxidants to escape the damage from reactive oxygen species. And some papers have shown that to be the case, that when you give a great deal of antioxidants to someone, cancer cells grow. So there's not enough research on this to say definitively whether things work or don't work, whether antioxidants work or don't work, but it seems to me the logic of it would say that antioxidants are probably giving cancer a tool to escape the damage from free radicals. So, but I do know that there also are studies on vitamin C infusions that seem to slow cancer growth, and I don't really know I don't think anybody knows yet what the mechanism of that is. It might be some other effect that vitamin C has intravenously, I'm not sure. But my point here with this slide is to let you know that antioxidants aren't all they're chalked up to be. So another question that I get is about vegetarian diets and ketosis. Recommendations for treating cancer with a ketogenic diet is 12 grams of carbohydrate per day. By necessity, vegetarians don't eat a lot of protein, animal protein. They don't eat any animal protein, so they depend on a lot of vegetables and grains and things like that for their diet, and that means eating more carbohydrates. So vegetarians will find that getting carbohydrate grams to below 12 is going to be difficult. But anything you can do to reduce your carbohydrate intake should help to lower blood glucose and insulin levels. So I know that there are people out there on vegetarian diets that are doing a ketogenic diet for diabetes, and it does help. So, but I don't think there's much research out there for cancer, and I'm not sure that someone eating a vegetarian diet could get their ketones high enough for it to make an effect. But everybody's different, so if it's something to try for sure. So that's the presentation. Thank you for listening. You can find a great deal more information in my book. And if you go to the right column of my webpage, Ketogenic Diet Resource, the book is there in electronic format. It's also now on paperback, in paperback on Amazon.com. So I would encourage you to go there too if you'd rather have a copy. And I also have some books. The Ketogenic Diet has a ton of evidence for treating diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. So if you know somebody who's diabetic, it might be something to look into for them, because it can really, in effect, reverse type 2 diabetes and help type 1 diabetics keep their blood sugars in a normal range. So thank you. I appreciate your listening, and I hope this has been helpful.
Thank you so much, Ellen. What incredible information, and I really feel like you presented it in a way that people can understand and use this as a tool to make a difference in their lives. We have a lot of questions that have lined up in the queue, so let's get started. Here's a person who says that she has type 1 diabetes, and she's wondering if her understanding is that since they have an autoimmune disease and no pancreatic function, it's dangerous for them to spill ketones. And so this is a nice segue into your ketogenic diet for type 1 diabetes. How does a person with type 1 diabetes, how would they work with a keto diet?
So the first thing I would say is that if your doctors are telling you that because they're confusing nutritional ketosis with what's called diabetic ketoacidosis. So type 1 diabetics have to be very careful about allowing blood sugars to get very high and not taking insulin to knock down that blood sugar, because they don't have any insulin internally, there's no brake on ketosis. So insulin acts as a feedback factor for ketosis. So without insulin being made out of the pancreas, it's very easy for them to get into a state where they're making too many ketones, and because ketones are acidic, it can cause this acidotic condition in the body. So the book explains this in great detail, but basically the diabetic ketoacidosis is a function of illness. When type 1 diabetics get an infection or have some other, a heart issue or some other issue that drives up their stress hormones, then those stress hormones drive up blood sugar. And because they may be sick or not well, they're not taking enough insulin to keep that blood sugar down, so their ketones also go up. So it's this condition of this double factor condition, very high blood sugars with very high ketones. That's what causes ketoacidosis. In a type 1 diabetic who's on a ketogenic diet, it's a completely different story. You're taking your insulin as you should be, and your ketones stay in a level of nutritional ketosis. So that means a level of 1 to 3 millimole of ketones in the blood instead of the 20 to 25 millimole that you see in ketoacidosis. So the great thing about a ketogenic diet for type 1 diabetes is that instead of bolusing for a high carbohydrate meal, which means that your blood sugar goes very high and you take a huge amount of insulin to bring it down, and that causes sometimes a low blood sugar episode, a hypoglycemic episode, because it's all a kind of a crapshoot. You're having to manage those high spikes with a very high insulin, and then that brings it down very low. So the advantage of a ketogenic diet for people with type 1 diabetes is that you eat very little carbohydrate at each meal, which means you only need a tiny bit of insulin to bring down your mealtime blood sugars. So your roller coaster gets very, very level. Instead of having these spikes and drops, very, very low drops, you get a very smooth kind of more of a rolling hill effect instead of these huge spikes. So I would encourage anybody with type 1 diabetes to take a look at our book or to go to I wrote it with Dr. Keith Runyon, who is a type 1 diabetic himself. And he learned about this diet after 13 years of suffering from terrible hypoglycemia on the American diabetes diet and almost killing himself a couple of times because his meter broke and he didn't know it. Learning about the ketogenic diet made him very angry because he wasn't taught that in medical school. And when he found out that he could eat this way and keep his HbA1c at 5 instead of 8 and avoid long-term complications, he and I hooked up to write this book because he wanted people to know that this is out there for them. So I would encourage anybody with type 1 diabetes to take a look at that book. There's a great deal of information in it on this subject.
All right. There's another question. Do you suggest benzodiazepine as a supplement to reduce insulin?
I'm not familiar with that benzodiazepine.
I think it's the fat-soluble. Benzodiazepine is fat-soluble thiamine.
You know, I don't know. I've never heard that. I've never had anybody talk about it. I've definitely, if you go to PubMed.gov, you could, if there's some research out there on it, you could probably find it.
All right, excellent. Also, it says metformin may lower blood sugar, but it also causes eyesight loss. So we haven't found that to be a good alternative for lowering blood sugar. So berberine might be a better alternative. I don't know if you have familiarity with any of the
berberine,
herbs.
Definitely. I would choose berberine over metformin at any point, but, you know, I bring it up because people need to know that there are these alternative therapies. But, yeah, berberine is just as effective, if not more effective, than metformin.
Excellent. All right. Here's another question. When you were talking about antioxidants, this person is saying there's a difference between something like high-dose vitamin C and herbs that are also antioxidants that have been proven to have anti-cancer activity, whether they're given with chemotherapy or radiation therapy or not, like curcumin. So do you make that differentiation that not all antioxidants, or just because a compound has antioxidant activity means that it is suspect?
Yeah, I do make that. You know, it's gonna, again, it's an individual thing. So if curcumin is helping you, and it's also anti-inflammatory. That's the thing about curcumin and cinnamon and those kinds of things. They're anti-inflammatory, so they can help on that front as well. So yeah, I think it just depends on the person. Some people are going to react differently to substances that they put in their body, and if you find that these things help, then by all means, you know, use them. I just wanted to let you know that it's not an all or one proposition on one side, that there are papers that show antioxidant use. And it might be that the antioxidants given in that study where there were problems with it were artificial, synthetic ones. There might be a difference between natural intravenous vitamin C and something that's made from petroleum. So we don't know. There's just not enough research.
All right. Here's a person who says, are you saying that eating vegetables triggers high insulin? I think that you said eating certain vegetables are more problematic than others, correct?
Right, yeah. So the high starch vegetables and high sugar vegetables like tomatoes, winter squash, acorn squash, butternut squash, those are really high in carbohydrates. So any kind of carbohydrates, whether it's vegetable or bread, is going to drive up blood sugar, which then will cause the pancreas to release a lot of insulin.
Excellent. Here's another question about glutamine. It says, don't nutritionally oriented doctors recommend L-glutamine for chemo patients in high doses to help them overcome side effects?
They do. A lot of naturopaths will ask patients to take L-glutamine because it helps heal the gut. It's a very good gut treatment. Again, not enough research in this area, but Naisha Winters out of Durango, Colorado, she's a naturopath who's an oncologist. She recommends that and has some reasoning for that. And she has a new book coming out, so she may talk about it in her book called, I believe it's Metabolic Therapies for Cancer, but she talks about that. And again, this is just one view from Dr. Seafried at Boston College. That's what my book is based on, his work. So he's adamant that you don't want to take glutamine, but there are naturopaths who definitely recommend glutamine to help heal the gut.
Here's a question about cocoa and cocoa butter. Is cocoa or cocoa butter a good source of fat?
Yeah, cocoa butter is a great source of fat. Cocoa is a stimulant, so, you know, dark chocolate is allowed, 90% is allowed on the diet, but you have to remember, again, individual dark chocolate can be, the cocoa in that can be a stimulant for blood sugar increase. So, again, it just depends on the person, but yeah, I allow for 90% chocolate on my diet. I think you're better off just eating cocoa butter, but.
Here's another question. If a person is already underweight, will a ketogenic diet cause them to lose even more weight?
It's possible. Yeah, you want to make sure you eat plenty of fat. If you're already underweight, a ketogenic diet, which means you're very insulin sensitive, so it's very easy for you to drop weight. So you'd want to make sure that you have plenty of fat to make up for those calories. And in fact, for somebody who's really low weight or has trouble gaining weight, I would say you could probably add a little bit more protein to your diet to keep insulin up a little bit, and maybe add some, you know, a few more starchy vegetables, like eat more tomatoes that have a little more sugar, which will keep insulin up as well. So again, you know, very, very specific to each patient's needs. The diet can be you know, tweaked.
I think we have a lot of interest in this glutamine question. I've had a lot of questions that are coming in about glutamine. So first, maybe we should differentiate between, is glutamine dangerous if you do not have cancer? So people that are using glutamine for gut healing?
Glutamine is an excellent amino acid for healing the gut. It's really, the cells lining your gut love that stuff. They use it to heal themselves, and it really, there's a lot of evidence for that. So glutamine is not dangerous if you don't have cancer. It's just that we want to keep down any fuel sources that cancer might use. So for a cancer patient, taking glutamine supplements, although nation winners would disagree with me, we think is probably not a good idea. But I think there's still a lot of research going on that. So it's none of this is definitive at this point, because other than that, to say that a ketogenic diet has been shown to reverse and stop cancer from growing, but you know, the details of it, like the glutamine, I don't think there's been enough research yet to say for sure.
So if you have cancer and you're been recommended to take a glutamine supplement for either chemo side effects, or here's another one about post-workout recovery from exercise and to boost immunity. If you have cancer, you should perhaps limit that or have a discussion with your doctor about the pros and cons. But if you don't have cancer and you're using glutamine for those applications, there's nothing carcinogenic about glutamine.
No.
I think there was a little confusion on that because we got a lot of questions around that.
Yeah, no, glutamine is you know, if your immune system's working well and you don't have any cancer cells that are growing in your body, taking glutamine is not going to make any difference.
Here's another question. Is a ketogenic diet healthy if you do not have cancer?
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the healthiest diet for human beings. Again, depending on the individual. There are some people that don't do well on ketogenic diets. There are probably people who are more insulin sensitive, don't have genetic factors for insulin resistance and for metabolic syndrome. They might feel better on a high-carb diet. But for, I'd say, 65% of the population in the United States, that population is what I call carbohydrate intolerant. They don't do well on a high-carb diet. They don't feel good. They get brain fog. They have joint pain. They develop cancer, they develop diabetes, they just have all kinds of health issues on a high-carb diet, and those are the people that are going to do well on a low-carbohydrate diet. And it doesn't have to be ketogenic, it can just be low-carbohydrate. If you stay, you know, below 80 carbs a day and get away from grain and sugar, you're going to feel 100% better, even on just that.
All right. Here's a question that's come in about how do you find out if you are carbohydrate sensitive?
Okay, so go to my website, and I have a page on there called Pre-Diabetes. You'll just look on the left side or at the top, and then go and look at the list of symptoms that I put down. And if you have more than 3 or 4 of those symptoms, you're probably insulin resistant. Those are going to include Do you fall asleep in the afternoon and after lunch at work? Do you have trouble staying awake? Do you feel like you need like a sugar pick-me-up in the afternoon? Do you have joint pain when you get up in the morning? Do you have, do your feet burn when you stand for a long time? Do you have vision problems? Do you have heartburn? I have like 24 symptoms on that list to look at. There's lots of things out there that people suffer from that they think is maybe associated with old age or associated with just, you know, not feeling well today, that have a lot to do with insulin resistance. And it's basically the idea that if you eat a high carbohydrate meal and you feel woozy or dizzy or sleepy about 30 minutes after that meal, you've eaten too much carbohydrate. Because
and your website is
that basically means that you're having a hypoglycemic episode, which means that your blood sugar shot really high, your body released a ton of insulin to bring it down, and you now feel dizzy or woozy about a half hour later because your blood sugar is really low.
And your website is ketogenic-diet-resource.com?
That's correct.
All right. All right. Just want to make sure everybody had the right website to go to because we had a lot of interest in that. Let's see. Just want to make sure I didn't miss
Someone asked me
anybody.
here why they should stay away from cashews. Cashews are really high in carbohydrate. So, you know, almonds are about 2 grams per ounce. Cashews are like 9 grams per ounce.
I was kind of wondering that myself about the issues with cashews.
Yeah, cashews are really high. So, you know, a handful of cashews, now you're over your carb limits for the day.
All right. Let's see if I didn't. I'm just going through to make sure I didn't miss anything. We did have one person in the audience who's working with patients that uses a plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet to help people with diabetes and heart disease, and they see great results with this. So it sounds like right tool for the right job. Some individuals might respond quite well for that.
Some people might respond better to a plant-based diet. You know, a lot of people, there's just some people that don't want to eat meat. So I say do whatever, you know, works for you. I'm just out here to show you that this particular therapy is something to look into if you have cancer, because your docs are probably going to not know much about it. And although there are more and more now that are becoming coming online. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that the information about the Cancer Genome Atlas project is in a book called Tripping Over the Truth by Travis Christofferson. If you want to learn more about that whole process, about how the gene theory of cancer came about, that book is an excellent resource to read.
All right. Excellent. Well, I think I'm just scrolling through to make sure I didn't miss anybody. And it sounds like we got through all of our questions. So thank you so much, Ellen, for taking this time.
You're welcome. Thank you
to
for
learn more. I surely do appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy day to learn more about how to fight cancer with a ketogenic diet. We have some upcoming educational webinars on April 27th. Statin drugs are not the answer to preventing heart disease. That will be presented by Terry Lemerond. And then on Thursday, May 4th, we have a very special guest all the way from Australia, Dr. Adrian Lepresti, who is a researcher in depression and anxiety. He's just published a new paper, and he's going to be talking to us about integrative treatment for depression and anxiety. And then on Thursday, May 18th, we have K.P. Kalsa, who's going to be talking about an Ayurvedic approach to autoimmune diseases. So I hope that you'll be able to join us again for another educational webinar from Terry Talks Nutrition. Also, if you visit our website, you can sign up for a free weekly newsletter. We are very scrupulous about your emails. They will not be shared or sold to other companies. So if you would like to have a weekly update on what's new in integrative medicine and natural health, please sign up for the weekly newsletter. You can also access recordings of past seminars, and there's even a section where you can ask Terry your own personal health questions. For your daily dose of natural health and inspiration, you can follow Terry on Twitter at twitter.com/Terry Lemerond. We'd be honored if you find us on Facebook at Terry Talks Nutrition. And we also have on YouTube. There is now a Terry Talks Nutrition channel on YouTube that has all the past recordings of all of our educational webinars. This one will be up in about a day or two. So if you want to listen again, or if you have friends that you think would particularly benefit from the message in this webinar, please feel free to share that with them. And again, that's on YouTube on the Terry Talks Nutrition channel. Thanks so much for all of you. I hope that you are all well and healthy. And if we can answer any of your questions, feel free to submit them via the Terry Talks Nutrition website, and we will try to get you an answer. And until we meet again, good health to you. Bye-bye.